Hi everybody, Steve here again on Mr. Chuffy84. Hope you're all doing okay. I'm back again today to do a request today, the first of two requests to talk about the music of two particular bands. And this request came from a good friend of mine, somebody I used to go to school with, and she's asked me to talk about the music of two of the greatest bands of all time. I want to apologise, as I know from when I first wanted to do album reviews and film reviews, I was hoping to do them on a regular basis. But with work and other stuff as well, I've just not got around to doing them on a regular basis. So I'm aware that this is the first time that I've done this for a bit, but I hope you've been enjoying the reviews I've done so far here on Mr. Chuffy84. And as I say, I'm going to do two reviews this week, starting today with the music of Pink Floyd. This is really exciting for me because I've only just got into Pink Floyd really in the last few years. So I haven't been a lifelong Pink Floyd fan. It's only just in recent years that I've been getting into Pink Floyd, and I've really enjoyed listening to their discography, or at least the majority of it. So this one is for Michelle, as will the next one, because the next review I'm going to do later in the week is about the music of Queen. I'm really looking forward to that one as well. So today, Pink Floyd. Well, I've just realised I'm wearing a Beatles themed shirt today. Actually, Beatles themed t-shirt. I have got a Pink Floyd themed t-shirt with it's the Weird Fish brand, so you have fish in the place of like the band members or whatever. So this is the Beatles Abbey Road cover, but for this it's Krabby Road because you got the crabs, and on the Pink Floyd one I've got the 4 album covers, Fish You Were Here, The Sharp Side of the Moon, all that stuff. I wish I was wearing it, but anyway, that would have been good. But anyway, most importantly is not what I'm wearing. It's the music. So, Michelle, the music. Now then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the albums from 1971 onwards. I'm not going to go from the start of Floyd, from 1967, Summer of Love, because that was the early period with Syd Barrett. I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of that early Pink Floyd material. So we're talking about the albums like The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Saucer Full of Secrets. Those early albums from 67 through to 1970 is a bit too psychedelic for me, and I just couldn't really get into that early Floyd period with Syd Barrett. There are like odd tracks that I do quite like sort of on the psychedelic side, like Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, that kind of stuff. That's okay, but a lot of it I just couldn't really get into, So because when I first heard Floyd, the first album of theirs that I actually heard, like many other people I'm sure, was Dark Side of the Moon. Because classic album, one of the greatest albums of all time. I just thought I've just got to hear it, and so I did. But one album that I did try, and this is where we're going to start from today. The earliest album that I've got in my collection for you, Michelle, from 1971, and there's a reason for this, and it's this one. This is the Meddle album. Now, of a lot of these albums, these are the reissues that came out in 2011, the first of the CD reissues from 2011. So the Meddle album. Now, again, there's a reason for this. This was an album when I first heard it, before 2011. I didn't really get into. I didn't really get this album very much, because I was expecting it to be more like Dark Side of the Moon, which of course it wasn't. But the big track on this album, called Echoes, is very much the precursor to what we would hear on the Dark Side of the Moon. The music of Echoes was certainly a sign of things to come, what would lead to Dark Side of the Moon. So that was why I decided to revisit this album again when this was reissued in 2011. And when I got it and I heard it again, I enjoyed it so much more second time round. Echoes especially. The first half, and Echoes comprises of the whole of the second half of the album. The first half, One of These Days, is the other most famous track of one of the other famous tracks from this album, and Floyd played it live. They would play it live, the whole time after they recorded it. And David Gilmour, the singer and guitarist, he would go on and play it live in his solo tours, and he did in his last tour as well. So One of These Days has certainly had the longest shelf life of all the tracks on this album. The rest of the album is a bit hit and miss for me. Tracks like Fearless, I've never been so struck on Fearless, but A Pillow of Winds, not the most memorable track, but it's still a nice track to listen to. And Seamus with the Howling Dog is not the fans' favourite song by any means, but it's okay. It's all right as a track. But I think the pick of the bunch, outside of One of These Days and Echoes, is Saint-Tropez, which is a Roger Waters pen song. That's a really good song. I actually quite enjoy that one. So, but on the whole, it's a very interesting album and a very enjoyable one, especially if you want to hear the genesis of what would become the Dark Side of the Moon, and that's Echoes on Meddle. So, of course, after Meddle came, of course, Dark Side of the Moon from 1973. What else can be said about this album that hasn't already been said? Well, do I like it for a start? Yes, I do. It was the first Floyd album that I heard, as was the case, as I'm sure, for many, many, many people. A concept album, very much Roger Waters' concept. I won't bother you. I won't bore you with Roger Waters' sort of concept ideas, whatever. I'll leave you to look that up, because it's really about the music. That's why I'm here. And it's good stuff, and there's some quite interesting stuff and very innovative stuff as well. Like On the Run, for example, with sampling and looping and stuff that had never been done on record before, so it was very fresh, very new, groundbreaking, definitely. And some great songs, of course, on this album. Time, Money, of course, Money being one of the most famous ones, of course. Us and Them is fantastic, it's beautiful. I'd probably say the only one that I'm not so keen on, perhaps the weakest link of the album, perhaps I would say, is Any Colour You Like, which is the instrumental track on this album, which comes straight after Us and Them, so it goes straight into Any Colour You Like, straight after Us and Them. It's okay, it's a track, it's alright. So lyrically, it's very, very interesting as well. This album and the next album, very much Roger Waters thinking a lot about what happened to Syd Barrett. Syd Barrett, the original frontman of Pink Floyd, left the band after only a couple of years because of his drug habits, and the drugs that he was taking were so strong, so powerful that they frazzled his brain basically, and so it was very, very sad what happened to Syd. So songs like Brain Damage on this album, I know it doesn't sound very, very subtle, but it's actually it is more subtle than you think. And also Shine On You Crazy Diamond on Wish You Were Here, all about Syd Barrett, absolutely. But anyway, classic album, and of course the album design, of course, famous, absolutely brilliant. David Gilmour's work on this album as well is brilliant. David Gilmour, I prefer David Gilmour as a singer to Roger Waters, most definitely, and as a guitarist. I mean, one reason why I got into the Floyd was because of David Gilmour and his guitar playing, which is unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. Great album. So they had all the success with The Dark Side of the Moon. It was a very happy time for the band as well. They all got on well with each other at that time. Very, very creative. Then the next album. So what were they going to do? They were going to go back into the studio after touring Dark Side of the Moon. So what next? Well, they came into the studio with virtually nothing to work on. They just could not come up with any really good ideas. They had already tried out a new composition post Dark Side, which would go on to be, of course, Shine On, You Crazy Diamond. But apart from that, they had nothing else. So they spent days in the studio doing virtually nothing because they just could not come up with anything else. But they did eventually rework Shine On, You Crazy Diamond, and they came up with 3 other tracks. And all those put together, you have Wish You Were Here. From 1975, and for most fans, well, sorry, I'll rephrase that. For some fans, it's arguably better than Dark Side of the Moon. Even David Gilmour said himself that this is his personal favourite album. Because they went into the studio with virtually nothing, and they came up with this. From nothing, they came up with 5 fantastic tracks, 2 of which I know are the 2 blocks of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. The first 5 parts being the first part of the album, and then the last 4 parts of Shine On You Crazy Diamond being the last track of the album. So they bookend the album with Shine On You Crazy Diamond. And the other 3 songs, Welcome to the Machine, Have a Cigar, and of course the title track, Wish You Were Here. Now, I, again, like Meddle, when I first heard this album, I didn't really get it. I didn't appreciate it, I didn't enjoy it. But when I got this reissue from 2011 with all the others, or most of the others I should say, I really enjoyed it. Is it better than Dark Side? I don't know. I think they're both very different albums, and I enjoy them just as much. I don't know which is better, to be honest with you, but I definitely enjoy Wish You Were Here. And the album cover, again, I mean, just look at this. I mean, this is, yes, there's a lot of symbolism in Pink Floyd's stuff, and the guy on fire, and you're thinking, is that real? Were the flames superimposed later? You know, but no, it was done for real. On the classic albums program about Wish You Were Here, there are 2 classic albums programs as far as I'm aware. One on Dark Side, one on Wish You Were Here. On the Wish You Were Here program, the stuntman who did the fire stunt talks about that day when they shot it. And I think that was on the Warner Brothers movie lot as well. Very, 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 very interesting programs, I must say, actually, on both the albums. Fantastic stuff. Then moving on to 1977. Now, by this time, unfortunately, the band were starting to fall apart as far as their working relationships were concerned. They were becoming strained. Roger Waters taking a firm grip of the band, developing a lot of the material himself, all the lyrics becoming more and more. You know, Roger Waters is a miserable old so-and-so. Sorry, Rog, but he is very miserable, you know, and so his lyrics are very downbeat. A lot of politically charged lyrics, very angry lyrics, a lot of anger, a lot of discontent, a lot, you know, and the war would be more of the same. But firstly, Animals from 1977. Roger Waters starting to take, as I say, a real firm grip of the band, writing all the lyrics, and some very angry lyrics on this album. And you think, you know, the Animals, and yeah, the Animals tracks are, you know, the names of animals: dogs, sheep, pigs. You know, think, oh, this is interesting. But then you listen to the lyrics and you're like, whoa, you know, really interesting. Digs at various people, and you know. But if you put the lyrics to one side, the music is fantastic. I love this album. I think it's a great album. This was actually the one of the Floyd albums where immediately I thought, I like this. This is great stuff. Love this album. So again, just 5 tracks, but some big pieces. 13 minutes, 17 minutes, whatever. But great stuff. Great music. David Gilmour on guitar, unbelievable as always. Some wonderful stuff. And does some of the lead vocal stuff on here as well. Great album design again with the Battersea Power Station and the Floating Pig. Point it. So there we go. So great stuff. Always like that album. Then of course we go on to what is arguably, for some fans, maybe most fans, the Floyd's greatest album of all. The Wall. Even better than Dark Side. Not for me. It's okay, this album. I do like this album in some respects. Lyrically, some of it is some of this album is quite depressing in its subject matter. It's another concept album from Roger Waters, and it's all very much about Roger's feelings of the time, feeling more isolated, of feelings of isolation, of just wanting to just build a wall, like a I can't think of the word now. But he just wants to build like a wall around him, just to keep everything out. And he was getting annoyed of audiences at the time of their own concerts, and he was getting annoyed of so many things. Feelings about his views on education, of course, with Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, and he just wanted to build a wall himself around himself, and block everything and everybody out, and all that kind of stuff. Very depressing stuff. But musically, there's some very good stuff on this album. Another Brick in the Wall, of course, parts 1 and 2, I think, of course, part 1 as well as part 2, I think is great. There are actually 3 parts on the album. Goodbye Blue Sky is one of my favourites. It's some lovely vocal work by David Gilmour on this one, on that particular track, I should say. The stuff that is the most famous on this album is stuff that David Gilmour co-wrote with Roger Waters, of course. Comfortably Numb, featuring one of David's greatest guitar solos. Run Like Hell being another. Young Lust being another as well. So the stuff that David Gilmour co-wrote with Roger Waters, I mean, Roger wrote virtually the whole album himself, apart from those few tracks with David. And it's interestingly, it's the David Gilmour co-written stuff, which is actually some of the best stuff. But other tracks like Hey You, and is there anybody out there? Yeah, I'm struggling here because there's actually quite a few tracks on here which I'm not very, very keen on. I have to say, I'm not a big fan of. As a whole, it's still a good album to listen to, but it is hard work at first. When you hear this album for the first time, it's hard going. I will warn you. It gets easier, but it is depressing at times. But just various moments where you just think, that is good stuff. So is it my favourite album of Floyd? No, by no means. And this was where everything completely fell apart. Richard Wright was not happy with the keyboard player, not happy with how things were going by this time. And obviously there'd been a lot of infighting between the guys. David Gilmour, Roger Waters, Richard Wright, and Nick Mason on drums. And Richard was fired by Roger Waters after they toured this album. So, and David Gilmour was not overly happy with how things were going as well. So it was not a happy time compared to Dark Side of the Moon. This was a very depressing time for the band, but it went to number 1. The album went to number 1. One of the best-selling albums of all time. One of the biggest albums of all time. So there we are. No doubt there will be a classic albums program on this album at some point. I'm surprised there hasn't been one already, but not my favourite. Now the next album, Shell, and for everyone out there, I haven't got in my collection because I read so many bad things about it. People saying it was the worst Floyd album, and it's more of a Roger Waters solo album than a Pink Floyd album, and that's the Final Cut album from 1983. And it is more of the same as far as Roger Waters is concerned. In fact, the Final Cut is comprised mostly of a lot of leftovers from The Wall. David Gilmour, at the time, said to Roger Waters, well, why are we doing these songs if we left them out of The Wall in the first place? What's the point? If they weren't good in the first time round, why are we doing them? But Roger Waters was in charge, and he wanted to do them. And again, even though Richard Wright had gone from the band, the relationship between Roger Waters and David Gilmour got so bad by this time. There's one song on the album which I do know really well, and that is a really good song, although it does have a bit of strong language in it, and that's Not Now John, which was released as a single, but of course they had to change the lyrics, so it was more radio and family friendly. That's a good song, but yeah. But I haven't bothered with that album because of all the bad things I read about it. I've heard a bit of it online, and it's not amazing. It's not great. But there are some fans who love it, absolutely love it. They think it's one of their best albums, and that's fair enough. That's entirely how they feel. But by this time, it was virtually, they couldn't really work with each other very, very well. And after the final cut, Roger Waters left the band. As I say, Roger Waters as a singer, I don't rate him as a singer at all. His vocals got worse and worse. As you know, On the Wall, some of Roger's vocals on this album are rough, isn't it? Really, really rough. And it was the same on the final cut as well. But Roger decided to call it a day with Pink Floyd after the final cut, and he started his solo career. And David Gilmour went away and carried on with his solo album. And then in 1987, David Gilmour by that time had made 2 solo albums. His self-titled debut album, which I thoroughly recommend, Michelle, by the way. If you haven't tried out David Gilmour's solo work, he's done 4 albums. His first album, self-titled debut album, David Gilmour, About Face, On an Island, and more recently, Rattle That Lock. Rattle That Lock is a good album, but the one that I definitely recommend to you and to everyone out there is the first David Gilmour solo album, simply called David Gilmour, from 1978, recorded between Animals and the Wall. A great album. I love that album, and I thoroughly recommend it. So please do check it out, either online or or feel free to buy a copy. It's well worth it. Interesting lyrically as well, because David was struggling in Floyd at that time, and some of the lyrics reflect how he was feeling about being in the band at that time. So very, very interesting album. But in 1987, David was intending to record a 3rd solo album at that time, and for whatever reason, I don't know if it was because David wanted to work again with Richard Wright and Nick Mason, or the record label felt, EMI felt it would sell better if David just recorded under the Pink Floyd name. I don't know, but the Floyd got back together again without Roger Waters. Roger Waters not happy at all about David Gilmour using the Pink Floyd name without him being part of it. But Pink Floyd got back together in 1987. David Gilmour, Richard Wright, and Nick Mason to bring out A Momentary Lapse of Reason. Not one of the most popular albums for the fans because of its production and the fact that they see it as more of a David Gilmour solo album. As I was saying, it was intended to be David Gilmour's 3rd solo album, and for many fans it came across that way, and I can see what they mean. Richard Wright, even though he is on this album, he's not on all of it, and he's virtually non-existent on this album as well. Although he did tour with the band, he toured the album with the band, and that was great. But yeah, Richard Wright's contributions on this album are virtually non-existent. You know, meaning that he's not featured prominently. It's David Gilmour's album more than anything. But it is I like this album. Not everybody likes this album, but I do. I really do. I think it's great. Yes, it's 80s. It has some 80s sounds to it and whatever. But there's some great stuff on here. The songs are not bad. Some of them are not the finest, but they're okay. It's the second half of the album I particularly like, I must say. The instrumental stuff, which I think is great. Terminal Frost is a great piece. I love that. Of the songs, Sorrow, which is the last track on the album, big epic track to finish the album, about 9 minutes long. That's a good one. Songs like Learning to Fly, you know, not my favourite song. I know the band, you know, toured with it and they performed that a lot, but yeah, not so keen on that song. But Signs of Life, I think it's great. One Slip is also good. On the Turning Away, also quite a nice song as well. This is, you know, the post Roger Waters stuff. I wouldn't say it's classic stuff, but it's still good. I still quite like it. So that's good. So yeah, do enjoy that. Then there was after that, and they went on with a very successful tour. They put out a live album promoting Momentary Lapse of Reason, and that was, of course, Delicate Sound of Thunder, the double live album, as I say, promoting Momentary Lapse of Reason. Again, so a lot of the stuff from the album, plus the classic, some of the classic stuff, the classic Floyd stuff from Dark Side and Wish You Were Here. Very well worth a listen. Absolutely brilliant. And then 7 years later, all of 7 years later, the guys get back together again, David, Richard and Nick, as a three-piece, to bring out another album together, The Division Bell. 1994. I remember seeing this album in record shops, just looking at that cover and just staring at it, because it's fascinating stuff, and it's just fascinating artwork. The artwork on Floyd's albums is unbelievable. It's so good. The material is great, and what is good, the last album was deemed to be more of a David Gilmour solo album, but this is more of a Floyd album. Richard Wright being more involved in this album, in the writing and in the playing. He even sings lead vocals on one of the songs. A Great Day for Freedom, I think it is. It's either that one or Wearing the Inside Out. Whoops, it might be Wearing the Inside Out. Sorry, didn't mean to get that wrong. But there's some great songs on here. What Do You Want From Me? Some good instrumentals on here. Cluster One and Marooned especially is a lovely instrumental. Keep Talking, which features some speech from Stephen Hawking, funnily enough. But this, and High Hopes is the big track on this album, and very, very good, very, very successful. And they brought out another live album to promote this album, and that's the Pulse album, which came out just after this album, and featured a lot of the stuff from here, and they performed The Dark Side of the Moon in its entirety, and that's the second half of the Pulse live album. So there we are. So that is the Division Bell. Now I meant to, I won't do this now because I don't want to go away and then come back, but the most recent Floyd album that came out, of course, was The Endless River. Now this is a mostly instrumental Pink Floyd album, which was made after, or rather it was put together, I should say, after Richard Wright's passing, a good number of years ago now. But David Gilmour and Nick Mason went back to a lot of recordings that they made during the Division Bell era. Originally, the Division Bell was going to be a double album. All the songs being, I think, the first half of the album, and the second half of the album was going to be an instrumental second half called The Big Spliff. So returning to their more psychedelic roots, as it were, and doing a lot of instrumental work and jamming, lots of jamming, and they recorded tons of music. David and Richard and Nick, they recorded tons of music for the Division Bell sessions. A lot of which, of course, the instrumental stuff that was going to be on this album was discarded, wasn't used. Because that maybe the EMI just felt, no, we don't want all that stuff. We just want the songs. And that's fair enough. So David Gilmour and Nick Mason went back to the tapes. They went back to all the other recordings that they made for this instrumental section, and they had enough material to put together a new album, to actually put it out as a new album, which they did quite a few years ago now. The Endless River. I'm sorry I haven't got it out with me to show you, but it's an album that has obviously divided fans and critics because it is mostly an instrumental album, bar one song, which was a song which I think was started when Richard Wright was still alive. I actually recorded a bit of it when Richard was still alive. And that's at the end of the album. It was released as a single as well. But I like that album a lot. I love the ambient nature of it. It's quite ambient in places. It's a bit psychedelic in places. I love it. I really do. I think it's and The Endless River was titled that because that is a lyric from High Hopes, from the end of the previous album. So I really like that album, The Endless River. I know not everybody does, but I think it's great. And will there be any more Floyd material? I don't think so, because very, very sadly, Well, Roger Waters obviously has had a successful solo career. You know, he won't be doing any more Floyd material, even though the guys did get back together. They actually reunited in 2005 for that one-off performance for Live 8, I think, wasn't it? I think it's supposed to. They did that famous appearance, that famous reunion. But no, Roger Waters won't be back with them, and Richard Wright has since passed away. But anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've enjoyed this review, Michelle, and everyone out there. Let me know what your favourite albums are of Floyd, and it would be great to see what your favourite albums are. But I hope you enjoyed that. Next will be Queen. I'm looking forward to that very, very much. Michelle, I hope that you enjoyed this review. Hope you all did too, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye bye now.